The people carrying the heaviest burdens are often the ones nobody notices. I learned that truth on a rainy Thursday evening while balancing 3 dinner plates on one arm and trying not to let anyone see how badly my feet hurt. The diner was packed. Coffee machines hissed. Silverware clinked against ceramic plates. Outside, headlights blurred through rain-soaked windows. Inside, every table seemed to need something at the exact same moment. I forced a smile and kept moving. That was what I always did. My name is Grace Parker. I was 27 years old, 7 months pregnant, and working 2 jobs because life had stopped offering easy choices a long time ago. My first shift started before sunrise at a bakery on the east side of the city. By 4 in the afternoon, I crossed town and changed into my diner uniform. Most nights, I did not get home until nearly midnight. Then I slept a few hours and did it all again. The baby kicked gently beneath my apron as I delivered another order. I placed the plates carefully on a table and took a slow breath. My lower back ached. My legs felt heavy, but rent was due next week. The electric bill sat unopened on my kitchen counter. And babies, I was learning, needed far more than love. They needed diapers, clothes, doctor appointments, and stability. Things I was still trying to provide. Grace, my manager called from across the room. Table 12 needs their check. Coming. I grabbed the receipt and hurried across the diner. Halfway there, a wave of dizziness hit me unexpectedly. The room tilted. Not enough to make me fall. Just enough to make me stop walking. I gripped the edge of an empty booth and closed my eyes for 2 seconds. Maybe 3. When I opened them again, I forced another smile and continued forward. Nobody noticed. At least that was what I thought. Table 12 sat near the back corner. A man in an expensive black suit occupied the booth alone. He looked completely out of place among the neon signs and worn vinyl seats. His watch probably cost more than my car. His posture was calm, controlled, observant. I placed the check on the table. "Can I get you anything else, sir?" He looked up. Dark eyes, sharp features, the kind of face people remembered. For a brief second, his gaze dropped toward my stomach, then back to my face. "How many hours have you been working today?" The question caught me off guard. I blinked. "Excuse me. You look exhausted." Heat rushed into my cheeks. "I am fine." It was a lie. We both knew it. But pride can be stubborn when it is the only thing you have left. The man studied me for a moment longer before nodding. "Take care of yourself." I offered a polite smile and walked away. 5 minutes later, I forgot about him completely. The dinner rush returned. Orders piled up. Coffee refills. Dessert menus. Endless movement. By 10 o'clock, my shift finally ended. Rain still fell outside as I stepped into the parking lot and wrapped my thin jacket around myself. Across the street, hidden behind tinted windows of a black luxury sedan, the same man watched me leave. What I did not know was that he had already asked someone for my name. And what I could never have imagined was that before the night ended, Vincent Moretti would discover something that made him ask a question he could not stop thinking about. Why was a pregnant woman working 2 jobs completely alone? The next morning began at 4:30. My alarm vibrated across the nightstand long before sunrise, and for a moment I simply stared at the ceiling, trying to remember what it felt like to wake up rested. Outside my apartment window, the city was still dark. The baby shifted gently beneath my ribs as I sat up and placed a hand against my stomach. "Just a little longer," I whispered. It was something I said every morning. Promised to my child. Promised to myself. 20 minutes later, I was standing behind the bakery counter arranging fresh pastries beneath warm display lights. The scent of cinnamon and coffee filled the air. Most customers arrived half awake, searching for caffeine before work. I smiled, took orders, counted change. By noon, my feet already hurt. By 1 o'clock, my back felt like someone had attached weights to it. At 2, I clocked out and boarded a crowded bus across town. During the ride, exhaustion settled over me like a heavy blanket. I leaned my head against the window and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, just to rest. When I arrived at the diner, my second shift started almost immediately. The familiar sounds surrounded me. Plates, conversations, coffee machines, life moving faster than I could keep up with. Meanwhile, several miles away, Vincent Moretti sat inside a private office overlooking Manhattan. The floor-to-ceiling windows displayed a skyline most people only saw in magazines. Yet his attention remained focused on a single file resting on his desk. My file. A trusted associate stood nearby. Grace Parker, the man said. 27 years old. Lives alone. 7 months pregnant. Vincent remained silent. No criminal history. No family support in the city. Works mornings at a bakery and evenings at a diner. Vincent looked up. How many hours? Usually 15 to 16 hours a day. Something shifted in Vincent's expression. Not pity. Concern. The associate continued. Average sleep estimate is 4 to 5 hours nightly. Vincent leaned back slowly. 4 to 5 hours. The information bothered him more than it should have. He had built businesses, managed enormous responsibilities, worked impossible schedules himself. Yet somehow the image of a pregnant woman carrying plates while barely able to remain standing refused to leave his mind. What about the father? Vincent asked. The associate glanced down at his notes. No involvement. Silence filled the office. Vincent walked toward the windows. Thousands of people moved through the city below. Most would never notice someone like Grace Parker. Another hardworking woman trying to survive. Another invisible struggle hidden behind polite smiles. Yet something about her story felt different. Back at the diner, I carried a tray toward table 7 when a customer accidentally dropped a heavy purse into the aisle. Instinctively, I bent to pick it up. The movement sent a sharp ache through my lower back. My hand immediately found the edge of a nearby chair. I smiled anyway and handed the purse back. Thank you, sweetheart, the elderly woman said. You should be resting. I laughed softly. I wish. The woman studied me with kind eyes. You cannot do everything alone forever. Her words followed me long after she left, because deep down I knew she was right. That night after my shift ended, I stepped outside beneath cold autumn air. The street glistened from earlier rain. My body felt heavier than ever. Across the road, a black luxury sedan sat parked beneath a street lamp. I barely noticed it. To me it was just another expensive car. But inside, Vincent watched quietly through the window. He saw me pull a second employee badge from my purse. He saw the bakery logo attached beside the diner identification. Proof. Confirmation. The same woman had worked 2 full jobs in a single day. Vincent stared at the badges for several seconds. Then he looked away and asked a question nobody around him could answer. Why was a woman carrying this much responsibility completely alone? By the end of the week, exhaustion felt less like a temporary problem and more like a permanent companion. I carried it everywhere. In my shoulders. In my legs. In the slow, careful way I lowered myself into chairs. Friday afternoon arrived with gray skies and cold winds sweeping between the buildings. My bakery shift had just ended. Instead of heading directly to the diner, I stopped at a grocery store a few blocks from my apartment. The shopping cart remained mostly empty. A gallon of milk, bread, eggs, a few vegetables. I stood in the checkout line mentally calculating every dollar before placing items on the conveyor belt. That had become a habit. Every purchase required a decision. Every decision affected the next week. The baby kicked gently while I loaded groceries into 2 reusable bags. We are doing our best, I whispered quietly. The words were for both of us. Later that evening, after finishing another long shift at the diner, I climbed 3 flights of stairs to my apartment. The building was old. The hallway lights flickered occasionally. The heating system worked only when it felt like cooperating. Yet it was home. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The apartment was small enough that I could see almost every room from the entrance. A worn sofa sat near the window. A tiny kitchen occupied one corner. A crib stood, partially assembled beside the bedroom door. I had purchased it secondhand from a local community group. Some pieces still needed tightening. I placed my purse on the counter and slowly lowered myself onto the couch. Silence filled the room. No television. No music. Just the hum of an aging refrigerator. Meanwhile, several miles away, Vincent Moretti sat inside his office reviewing additional information about Grace Parker. The report contained photographs of the apartment building, employment records, medical appointments, and financial history. None of it made for comfortable reading. She has no support system? Vincent asked. The investigator shook his head. Not nearby. Vincent studied another page. Friends. A few coworkers. Nobody providing financial help. Vincent looked toward the window. Something about the situation bothered him deeply. Not because hardship was unusual. He had seen hardship before. What troubled him was the complete absence of anyone standing beside her. Back inside my apartment, I opened a kitchen drawer searching for spare batteries. Instead, I discovered something else. A small framed photograph had slipped behind a stack of unopened mail. Picked it up carefully. The image showed my mother and me years ago. I could not have been older than 6. Her arm rested around my shoulders. Both of us were smiling. For a long moment I stared at the photograph. My mother passed away when I was young. Some memories remained clear. Others faded with time. Yet one thing never changed. She always found a way to help people, even when she had very little herself. I placed the photograph beside the crib and smiled softly. The next morning, Vincent received another call from the investigator. There is one more thing, the man said. You should see this. Minutes later, a photograph appeared on Vincent's desk. It showed a younger Grace standing beside her mother many years earlier. Vincent picked it up casually. Then his expression changed completely. Because the woman standing beside young Grace was someone he recognized immediately. Someone from his past. Someone he had not thought about in more than 20 years. Vincent stared at the photograph in silence. Then he slowly sat down. For the first time since the investigation began, he understood that this was not a coincidence at all. The photograph remained on Vincent's desk long after everyone else had left the office. Evening shadows stretched across the room while city lights slowly awakened beyond the glass walls. He stared at the image again. A young Grace standing beside her mother. The resemblance was unmistakable. But it was not Grace who held his attention. It was the woman beside her. Claire Parker. 22 years earlier, Vincent had met her during one of the most difficult periods of his life. Back then, he had been younger, less patient, and carrying responsibilities that often felt larger than himself. Claire worked at a community outreach center that partnered with several charitable programs throughout the city. She never cared about status, never cared about influence. She treated everyone exactly the same. Vincent remembered that clearly. More importantly, he remembered something else. One winter evening, when a funding crisis threatened to close a shelter serving dozens of families, Claire had spent weeks organizing volunteers and donations until the center survived. She never asked for recognition, never accepted praise. She simply helped because people needed help. Vincent slowly leaned back in his chair. He had not thought about Claire Parker in years. Yet now her daughter was working herself beyond exhaustion while carrying a child and facing the world alone. The realization settled heavily in his chest. Meanwhile, my weekend continued exactly as usual. Saturday morning began before sunrise. By noon, I had finished my bakery shift. By late afternoon, I was carrying trays at the diner again. Every movement felt slower than the day before. Even simple tasks required concentration. Around 7 o'clock, a young couple entered the diner holding hands. They looked excited, nervous, happy. As I delivered their drinks, I overheard them discussing baby names. The conversation made me smile. Later, while clearing their table, the woman touched my arm gently. "How far along are you?" she asked. 7 months, I replied. Her eyes brightened immediately. "You are going to be an amazing mother." I thanked her and walked away before she noticed how emotional the words made me feel. Some days, encouragement felt almost as valuable as money. Across town, Vincent sat inside a private meeting with 2 trusted associates. The photograph of Claire Parker rested beside several reports. "I want everything handled carefully," he said. Both men nodded. No attention. No publicity. No pressure. One of them frowned slightly. "You are planning to help her?" Vincent looked toward the photograph. "I am planning to honor a debt." The answer ended the discussion. Later that night, after my shift finally ended, I returned home and discovered a letter taped to my apartment door. My stomach tightened immediately. Most unexpected letters involved bills. This one came from the property management office. I carried it inside and sat carefully at the kitchen table before opening it. The message was brief. Effective immediately. Your monthly rent has been reduced due to a building assistance program. I read the sentence twice, then 3 times. Surely there had been some mistake. My rent had never gone down. Not once. Yet the letter appeared official. I stared at the page in disbelief. Relief mixed with confusion. A few $100s each month would make an enormous difference. Enough to buy baby supplies. Enough to breathe a little easier. Enough to sleep without calculating expenses every night. Across the city, Vincent received confirmation that the adjustment had been approved. He nodded once and set the report aside. It was only a small step. A simple gesture. Yet for the first time in years, he felt as though he was finally keeping a promise made long ago. What neither of us realized was that this would be only the beginning. The rent reduction should have solved one problem. Instead, it created a new one. Questions. Every time I looked at the letter sitting on my kitchen counter, I felt the same mixture of relief and confusion. Assistance programs did not usually appear out of nowhere, especially not when nobody had applied for them. Yet the savings were real. For the first time in months, I bought groceries without calculating every penny twice. I purchased a few baby supplies I had been postponing. A small blanket, package of diapers, tiny socks that fit in the palm of my hand. Standing in the baby aisle nearly brought tears to my eyes. They were ordinary purchases. To me, they felt like miracles. The following week brought another surprise. During a routine prenatal appointment, I arrived expecting the usual paperwork and expenses. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Soft music played overhead while patients flipped through magazines. After my examination, I approached the reception desk to arrange payment. The receptionist typed something into her computer and frowned slightly. "That is strange," she said. My stomach tightened immediately. Strange usually meant bad news. "What is wrong?" I asked. She looked up and smiled. "Nothing is wrong. It appears your balance has already been covered through a maternal wellness sponsorship program." I blinked. "A what?" She reviewed the screen again. "A private program. Everything has been approved." I stood there speechless. There must be a mistake. There is no mistake. She handed me a printed receipt showing a $0 balance. My hands trembled as I accepted it. Twice in less than 2 weeks. First my rent. Now this. As I walked toward the parking lot afterward, I could not shake the feeling that someone was quietly moving pieces around my life when I was not looking. Across the city, Vincent sat inside a conference room reviewing updates from several charitable foundations connected to his organization. One report detailed the medical sponsorship now supporting Grace's prenatal care. Another outlined educational grants, housing programs, community assistance projects. Most of the initiatives had existed for years. For the first time, Vincent paid attention to every detail. He remembered Claire Parker doing the same thing decades earlier, looking past numbers and reports to see actual people. The memory stayed with him throughout the day. That evening at the diner, business was unusually busy. Every booth filled. Every table occupied. Orders arrived faster than the kitchen could process them. Near 8 o'clock, one of the newer waitresses accidentally dropped an entire tray of drinks. Glass shattered across the floor. The young woman froze. Her face immediately turned pale. Tears filled her eyes. "I am so sorry," she whispered. Several customers looked annoyed. Others simply stared. Without thinking, I stepped forward. "It is okay," I told her. "Help me grab the mop." She looked at me helplessly. "I am going to get fired." "No, you are not." Together we cleaned the mess while the manager handled customer complaints. 20 minutes later, the crisis had passed. The young waitress hugged me before returning to work. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Nobody ever stands up for me." I smiled. Everybody needs someone sometimes. What I did not know was that a familiar man had witnessed the entire interaction from a corner booth. Vincent had arrived earlier for a private meeting nearby and stopped in for coffee afterward. He watched everything. The accident. The panic. The way I immediately helped someone else despite carrying enough burdens of my own. For a long moment he sat quietly staring into his coffee cup. Then he looked toward me again. And suddenly he understood something important. Grace Parker was not remarkable because she endured hardship. She was remarkable because even in hardship, she still found ways to help other people. And that realization reminded him exactly of someone he had once promised never to forget. After that night, I could no longer ignore the feeling that something unusual was happening around me. Individually, each event seemed explainable. A rent reduction, medical assistance, a few unexpected breaks at work. But together they felt connected, like invisible threads pulling in the same direction. I just could not see who was holding them. The following Tuesday, I arrived at the bakery before dawn as usual. Rain tapped softly against the front windows while I arranged fresh muffins inside the display case. The smell of warm bread filled the air. Most mornings followed the same routine. That morning did not. Around 7 o'clock, my manager approached holding a clipboard. "Grace, I need to talk to you." My stomach tightened immediately. Usually those words meant a problem. Did I do something wrong? He looked surprised. Wrong? No. Then he smiled. "Actually, I have good news." Good news felt so unfamiliar that I almost laughed. "What kind of good news?" "Starting next week, we are reducing your morning shifts." My smile disappeared. "I cannot afford fewer hours." "You misunderstood." He handed me the paperwork. "You will work fewer hours but receive the same weekly pay." I stared at him. That does not make sense. A local workforce wellness grant is helping support employees facing medical challenges. He pointed toward my stomach and grinned. Apparently, pregnancy qualifies. I looked down at the paper. The numbers were real. The reduction meant I would finally have time to rest. Actual rest. Something I had not experienced in months. I do not know what to say. Try saying thank you to whoever created the program. I nodded slowly, but inside the same question returned. Why did these opportunities keep finding me? Later that afternoon, Vincent stood inside a conference room reviewing updates from several community foundations. One of his advisors entered carrying a folder. "Everything has been approved." Vincent accepted the file. "And she still does not know." A faint smile touched his face. "Good." The advisor hesitated. "You could simply tell her." Vincent closed the folder. "This is not about gratitude." His gaze drifted toward the rain-covered skyline outside the windows. It never was. Across town, my evening shift at the diner began quietly. The dinner crowd had not yet arrived. I was wiping down a booth near the window when an elderly customer entered carrying a walker. I recognized him immediately. Mr. Harris. He visited every Tuesday. His wife had passed away the previous year, and since then he always sat alone near the corner. I guided him carefully to his usual table. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said. "You always remember. Some people are worth remembering." His smile widened. During the next hour, I checked on him several times, refilled his coffee, packed his leftovers, listened while he shared stories about his grandchildren. None of it felt like work. Felt human. As he prepared to leave, he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. "What is this?" I asked. "A quote my wife loved." I opened it after he left. The words were simple. "Kindness costs nothing, yet it changes everything." I read the sentence twice, then slipped it into my apron pocket. What I did not know was that someone had witnessed the entire interaction from across the room. Vincent sat quietly in a booth near the back, unnoticed once again. He watched me help a lonely customer long after my shift should have ended. He watched me smile despite exhaustion. And for the second time in a week, he saw something that reminded him of Claire Parker. But this time, the resemblance went beyond appearance. It reached something much deeper. Something that made him realize he could not remain invisible much longer. The change came on a cold Thursday evening. The diner was quieter than usual. Rain tapped softly against the windows while a handful of customers lingered over coffee and conversation. My shift was nearly over when my manager approached carrying a small envelope. "Someone left this for you," he said. I frowned. "Who?" He shrugged. "A gentleman. Dark suit. Expensive watch." That is all I know. My stomach tightened immediately. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. I waited until my shift ended before opening it. Inside was a single card. No signature. No explanation. Just an address and a time. Saturday, 11 o'clock in the morning. I almost threw it away. For 2 days, I carried the card inside my purse while arguing with myself. Curiosity battled caution. By Saturday morning, curiosity won. The address led to a quiet office building overlooking the river. Nothing about it seemed threatening. Still, my pulse quickened as I stepped inside. A receptionist greeted me warmly and escorted me upstairs. Moments later, a familiar figure stood as I entered the office. Vincent Moretti. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Sunlight filtered through enormous windows behind him. The city stretched across the horizon. You, I finally said. He nodded. Please sit down. I remained standing. Suddenly, every strange event from the past few weeks rushed through my mind. The rent reduction, the medical assistance, the reduced work schedule, the feeling that someone was watching from the shadows. It was you. Vincent did not deny it. Yes. Anger arrived before I could stop it. You had people investigating me? His expression remained calm. I needed answers. You had no right. The words escaped faster than I intended. You do not know me. You are right. For the first time, his voice carried genuine regret. I did not know you. I folded my arms protectively across my chest. Then why? Silence filled the room. Outside, clouds drifted slowly above the river. Vincent walked toward a nearby table and picked up a framed photograph. When he handed it to me, my breath caught instantly. It was an old picture of my mother. Younger. Smiling. Standing beside several volunteers. Where did you get this? I whispered. I knew her. My heart pounded. What? Vincent returned to his chair. More than 20 years ago, your mother helped people when nobody else would, including members of my family. I stared at the photograph. My mother never mentioned you. She would not have. His eyes settled on the image. She never did good things for recognition. The anger inside me began to weaken beneath confusion. So all of this happened because of her? Partly. Vincent paused. But not entirely. I looked up. What does that mean? He exhaled slowly. At first, I helped because of a debt I owed. Then I started paying attention. His voice remained steady. Honest. I saw someone carrying more responsibility than most people twice her age. I saw someone exhausted, frightened, and alone. Yet every time life gave you a reason to become bitter, you chose kindness instead. The room fell silent again. For the first time, I saw something different behind his composed exterior. Not power. Not influence. Respect. Genuine respect. My eyes drifted back to the photograph in my hands. Questions multiplied faster than answers. If Vincent truly knew my mother, then there were pieces of her life I had never understood. And judging by the expression on his face, he had not told me everything yet. Not even close. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The photograph rested in my hands while questions crowded my mind. I looked at my mother's smile frozen in time and felt something I had not felt in years. Curiosity, hope, grief, all at once. Vincent finally broke the silence. There is something your mother never told you. My eyes lifted toward him immediately. What do you mean? He leaned back slightly, choosing his words carefully. When I first met Claire Parker, she was helping families through a community outreach program. Most people volunteered for a few hours and went home. Your mother stayed long after everyone else left. A faint smile appeared on his face. She believed that if someone was struggling, they should never have to struggle alone. The words sounded exactly like her. Even after all these years, I could hear her voice saying something similar. Vincent opened a folder resting on the table beside him. Inside were several photographs and documents. He slid one picture toward me. It showed my mother standing outside a community center with a group of volunteers. This was taken 22 years ago, he said. I studied the image carefully. My mother looked happy, confident, alive. That winter was difficult for a lot of families, Vincent continued. Funding disappeared. Programs were closing. Many people would have lost support. His gaze moved toward the photograph. Your mother spent weeks organizing donations and volunteers. She saved that center. I swallowed hard. She never told me any of this. Because she never helped people for recognition. The room fell quiet again. Then Vincent reached for another document. There is more. My heart began beating faster. More. He nodded. Several months before she passed away, your mother met with me. I stared at him. You saw her before she died? Yes. His voice softened. She knew she was ill. She knew her time was limited. Suddenly it felt difficult to breathe. The office around me seemed to disappear. What happened? Vincent hesitated for the first time since our conversation began. She asked me for a promise. I felt my fingers tighten around. The photograph. A promise. He nodded slowly. She was worried about you. My eyes immediately filled with tears. Me. You were still a child. His expression remained steady. She told me that if life ever became difficult for you, if you ever found yourself alone, she hoped someone would notice. The tears came before I could stop them. I looked away toward the city beyond the windows. For years I had carried questions about my mother. Regrets. Missing pieces. Now one of those pieces finally sat in front of me. Vincent allowed the silence to remain. He did not rush me. He did not look uncomfortable. He simply waited. After several moments I wiped my eyes and looked back at him. So everything you did was because of a promise? Vincent considered the question carefully. At first, yes. Then his expression changed slightly. More honest. More personal. But somewhere along the way, it became something else. I frowned. What do you mean? He glanced toward the photograph in my hands. The more I learned about you, the more I realized you had become exactly the kind of person your mother hoped you would be. The words settled quietly between us. Outside, sunlight reflected across the river. Inside, something felt different. Lighter. As though a door I had been pushing against for years had finally opened. Then my phone suddenly rang. The sound shattered the moment. I reached into my purse and answered. It was my doctor's office. The nurse sounded calm, but her words immediately changed everything. Grace, she said gently, we need you to come in this afternoon. We would like to check on the baby. My heart skipped a beat. And judging by the look on Vincent's face, he knew immediately that something important had just happened. The drive to the medical office felt longer than it should have. Every possibility raced through my mind while rain streaked across the windows. Vincent remained calm beside me, saying very little, yet his presence somehow made the silence easier to carry. When we arrived, the nurse greeted me immediately and escorted me toward an examination room. The next 30 minutes felt endless. Machines hummed softly. Monitors glowed. Questions filled my head. Then finally the doctor smiled. A real smile. The kind that reaches the eyes. Everything looks good, she said. I released a breath I felt as though I had been holding for hours. The baby is healthy. We simply wanted an additional examination because of your work schedule and stress levels. Relief washed through me so quickly that tears appeared before I could stop them. Healthy. That was all I needed to hear. Outside the office, Vincent stood when he saw me approaching. He studied my face for a moment. Good news. I nodded. Good news. The tension left his shoulders immediately. Neither of us mentioned it, but for a brief second, it felt as though he had been worried too. The weeks that followed passed differently than the months before them. I worked fewer hours. I slept more. The constant fear that had followed me everywhere slowly began to loosen its grip. Vincent never tried to control my life. He never treated me like a charity project. Instead, he became something unexpected. A steady presence. Sometimes we shared coffee after appointments. Sometimes we talked about my mother. Piece by piece, he filled in stories I had never heard. Stories about her kindness, her courage, the people she helped without expecting anything in return. Every story felt like finding another missing piece of her. Then winter arrived. The first snowfall covered the city in white. 2 weeks later, my son entered the world on a quiet December morning. The hospital room was warm. Sunlight filtered through the window. When the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, everything else disappeared. The bills, the stress, the fear, all of it. There was only him. Tiny fingers, Tiny breaths. A brand new future. I looked down at his face and cried harder than I ever had in my life. Not from sadness. From gratitude. Later that afternoon, a soft knock came at the hospital door. Vincent stepped inside carrying a small gift bag. He looked almost uncomfortable standing there. I smiled. "You can come in." He approached slowly and looked down at the sleeping baby. For several seconds he said nothing. Then a rare smile appeared. Genuine. Quiet. "He is perfect," he said. "I think so too." He placed the gift beside the bed. Inside was a framed photograph. Not of him. Not of me. Of my mother standing outside the community center 22 years earlier. On the back was a handwritten note. "Some promises take years to keep." Tears filled my eyes again. "Thank you," I whispered. Vincent shook his head gently. "Thank your mother." Several months later, a new community foundation opened in the city. Its mission was simple: supporting single parents, working mothers, and families facing difficult circumstances. Hundreds of people benefited during its first year alone. My life looked different too. I moved into a better apartment. My son grew stronger every day. For the first time in years, the future felt bigger than survival. One snowy evening, I stood by my window holding my son while city lights sparkled beyond the glass. On the table beside me sat my mother's photograph. I finally understood what Vincent had been trying to tell me all along. Kindness never truly disappears. It moves forward through the lives it touches. My mother changed someone's future 22 years ago. That kindness eventually found its way back to me. And as I looked at my son sleeping peacefully in my arms, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes the people who save us are gone long before we need saving. Yet somehow their love still finds a way to reach us.